What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Sasquatch Sunset, a delightfully original movie that basically allows us the privilege of sharing a year in the lives of a family of Sasquatch or Yeti or Bigfeet or whatever you want to call them. I found it hilarious, transporting, at times incredibly sad. It leans all in on pure visual storytelling that basically left me in this state of almost like meditative calm. And it features this one scene that's so disgusting and yet so goddamn funny that I'm going to be in a good mood for days, just kind of savoring the memory of having seen it. But with all that said, I suspect the audience for this movie is going to be minuscule, bordering on niche. The movie has no dialogue apart from like growls and howls and grunts and that sort of thing. And in spite of starring Jesse Eisenberg as well as Riley Keough, you would never know it because they're buried beneath layers upon layers of really, really convincing prosthetics. And the story, such as it is, it's a little ambiguous. It doesn't guide the viewer by the nose to any obvious conclusions. Basically, it's trying to be a work of art that allows the audience to do some of the work. It allows them to think. And we all know how much people like to think and to figure things out for themselves. But if you've seen the trailer and it grabbed you, go see it. This is that rare thing in independent movies these days, a completely deranged comedy with enough heart for 10 movies combined, and I'm thrilled that it even exists. So let's start with the cast and crew. As stated on Wikipedia, Sasquatch Sunset is a 2024 American surreal comedy film directed by David Zellner and Nathan Zellner and written by David Zellner, starring Riley Keough, Jesse Eisenberg, Christoph Zajac-Denik, and Nathan Zellner. The film follows a family of Sasquatch over a period of 1 year. Ari Aster served as an executive producer under a square peg banner. It had its world premiere at the 2024 Sundance Film Festival on January 19th, 2024. The film was released by Bleecker Street on April 12th. Obviously, I'm a couple days late, but I've been playing catch up the last couple days, but I'm talking about it now. Now, the Zellners are hardly newcomers. They have a ton of experience, but somehow I've remained totally clueless about their work until now, but that's about to change. They have my full, unbridled attention, and there are times in this movie where the photography and the music and the performances, they blend together so harmoniously that I was reminded of the work of Werner Herzog, and some of you might scoff, but watch the movie, and some of you will agree, especially if you like the narrative films of Herzog from the 1970s. And when you hear the music and when you see the photography, you will know precisely what I'm talking about. But I can't remember the last time a movie made me feel so completely immersed in the natural world with animals and rivers and streams and sunrises and sunsets. And there's some moments in this film of such bone-chilling emotional intensity that they border on elegiac. And I don't want to spoil anything, but the title of the film is Sasquatch Sunset, not Sasquatch Sunrise. So prepare to be sad, but the movie's also deliciously profane, bordering on deranged or outright juvenile. If you like wildly inappropriate humor involving sex, drugs, poop, pee, all the above, this is the movie for you because you're going to see all the above in abundance over and over and over again. And I was just howling like a hyena, basically like a 5-year-old child on too much sugar and caffeine. I was probably annoying the shit out of the 2 other people that were in the theater with me down at the Angelica yesterday afternoon. And I know I'm running the risk of wildly overpraising the movie, and I do have a few criticisms, which I'll get to in just one sec. But what it reminded me of was the spirit of independent filmmaking from the late 90s when filmmakers like Todd Solondz would make movies like Happiness, where you're just like, oh my God. And Happiness is a very different experience and has a much more kind of dark, sinister look at human nature. But independent movies just used to explore some really strange, unusual emotional terrain. But my attitude is if you're making a low-budget movie, not only do you have the freedom to explore kind of unusual terrain, but you have to give the audience an experience that they can't get with a much more kind of glossy, big-budget production. If you want to compete, if you want to remain distinctive, well, then you're going to have to go to places that you would never see in a more kind of conventional mainstream movie. And so my hat's off to Jesse Eisenberg and Riley Keough for even getting involved. And of course, Riley Keough, she is Elvis's granddaughter. She first got my attention in Mad Max Fury Road. I was like, God damn, she is just stunningly beautiful. And over the last 10 years, she's racked up an incredible career. But this might be the best performance of her life because it's all in the eyes. Like, she's buried under just mountains upon mountains of prosthetics. But the eyes, I don't know who designed the suits for this movie, but they did a brilliant job of allowing the actors to have total control over this terrain, and they have to sell everything with their eyes. I mean, admittedly, they're going ooh, and grunting and growling and acting like maniacs the whole time. But when they slow down and something horrible happens, you see it in the eyes. Or when they slow down and something hilarious happens, you see it in the eyes. Or when one of them thinks it's business time and it's time to make some more Sasquatch, like, like you see it all in the eyes. And I think as actors, they must have loved just the challenge and just the freedom of not having to worry about like how they deliver lines of dialogue and that sort of thing, but just almost like a silent film star from like the teens or the 20s in the 20th century. You got to communicate everything just from a look or a gesture. And I just thought they knocked it out of the park, but I couldn't believe how haunting and how moving and just how astonishing the performance was by Riley Keough. And based on the trailer, I was expecting to laugh and laugh hard throughout the movie, and I did. But what really caught me off guard was just how moving it was and how sad it was. I mean, early on in the movie, you see all the Sasquatch in the woods doing this thing where they all kind of bang on trees, and you see it in the trailer, and that's basically like their signal, and then they pause and they wait, and they listen for a similar signal from somewhere else in the woods, and if they don't hear it, they'll don't, and they'll knock again. But throughout the movie, they keep doing this, and each time the camera will kind of linger on their faces, and like these creatures, they're not super sophisticated, so they just kind of wait patiently, and when they don't hear anything, well, they go on about their business. But we as the audience are like, oh no, like these creatures are totally alone, and they don't fully understand that the world has moved on and that they are the last of their kind, and that no matter how many times they knock on these trees, they're not going to find any more. And I'm about to start getting like misty-eyed even thinking about it, which is totally ridiculous because this is a movie where the actors spend half the time, throwing poop at each other and that sort of thing. But when it's sad, it is really sad, and it really got its hooks into me. And yeah, Jesse Eisenberg and Riley Keough, they're fucking incredible in this. And speaking of Jesse Eisenberg, I do have to give a shout out to him as a producer as well as a great actor, because not only is he appearing in movies like Sasquatch Sunset and just showing that he has an interest in off the beaten path material, he's also producing some really cool off the beaten path material. He recently was one of the producers on Jeremy Workman's new documentary, Secret Mall Apartment, which I did see just prior to its premiere at the South by Southwest Film Festival. And full disclosure, I know Jeremy Workman. I am biased. I'm rooting for him. It's one of the best goddamn documentaries you will ever see from any era. It just absolutely floored me. And the fact that Jesse Eisenberg was happy, not necessarily, like he's not a talking head, he's not like trying to like overshadow the production, but he's one of the producers on it. He's putting his weight behind some really cool projects. I feel like Eisenberg, he's got an amazing eye for material, and I just feel like if independent film is going to continue to survive and or thrive, it's going to be due to people with great taste, but also just the courage of their convictions to get behind really cool productions. Also, before I go any further, I do need to give a shout out to the Octopus Project, the group behind the music for this film. In the absence of the great score for this film, it would be greatly diminished, because in the absence of dialogue, when you basically just have these Sasquatch drinking out of creeks or eating fish or walking from one place to another, you got to have some great tunes. Otherwise, it's just going to feel like you're watching paint dry, even if the photography is really beautiful. So there are times where the movie almost takes on like grandiose operatic qualities because of the astonishing music and the cinematography by Mike Giolakis, if I'm saying that at all correctly. First rate, hell yeah. He's also worked with M. Night Shyamalan and Jordan Peele. So what was the budget on this movie? They seem like they got a lot of really strong people involved in any case. Bleecker Street, I've been aware of them for a long time, and I see their movies here and there, but I need to start giving a lot more love to them, because I used to live on 177 Bleecker Street back in the day before I moved up to my current apartment. So at a minimum, I got to be loyal to my fellow Bleeckerians or Bleeksterians or whatever the phrase is for people who operate on or live on Bleecker Street. But I've been ranting and raving quite a bit at this point without saying anything negative about the movie, so let's offer some critiques. There's one special effect in this movie, a prop that gets used heavily, like in the final third of the movie, where it basically breaks the tension of the movie in a lot of ways. And it's a shame, because if they'd used it in smaller doses, it probably would have worked. But how can I say this without giving it away? I mean, the movie's been out a couple days, but I feel like it's still in limited release. But there's just a very crucial special effects prop related to kind of like the goals and the survival of this family of Sasquatch. And if it had worked a little better, it would have given the movie more emotion. But because it doesn't quite work and it's also overused, it takes you out of the movie. It's distracting. And so, yeah, the movie is flawed. I wish that prop, I almost kind of wish they hadn't used the prop at all, but whatever. We can forgive it because the special effects for the actors otherwise are so goddamn good. But my other major criticism is that perhaps the most emotionally impactful and devastating and terrifying scene of the whole movie, it's not completely original or unique to this movie. And I guess it's not really a spoiler because the movie that it rips from is so obscure that I think most people haven't seen it, and so they won't even know what I'm talking about. But there's a movie from 1971 that Paul Newman directed called Sometimes a Great Notion, based on the book by Ken Kesey. It's a tough read. I mean, if you like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that's a more easily digestible experience. This book feels like it was written under the influence of some mind-altering substances, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but you got to really be invested and really be on board if you're going to kind of fight your way through it. But in the movie directed by Paul Newman, there's a scene where it's fucking terrifying and horrifying, and it's emotionally wrenching. I mean, it will rip your soul right out of your body and just like, it'll just leave you devastated. And if you've seen that movie, where they basically recreate that most famous scene from that movie here, and it works really, really well. But as I was watching, I was like, God damn you, like this scene's great. It's working well. I'm feeling the emotion. I'm feeling the panic. But you kind of stole it. And so I'm going to give them, I'm going to wag my finger in disapproval for basically like stealing this great scene. But you could also just say that it's a wonderful, loving homage to that great scene. And also, nobody's seen Sometimes a Great Notion, or the people who saw it, they all saw it back in 1971 and promptly stopped talking about it. I think I've met like two people in my life who've even seen that movie, so I guess they can be forgiven for borrowing from an obscure film. So if you're thinking to yourself, oh, like my 5-year-old child, they love reading about like the Bigfoot and the Sasquatch and that sort of thing and the abominable snowman, I'm going to take my child to see this because they'll have a delightful time. They will never recover. But there's so much fucking humor before and after that perhaps it'll help them kind of rebuild their emotional reserves. But what else can we say before wrapping this up? I guess I've gotten to just about everything I want to say without spoiling things, but independent cinema needs to rediscover the joys of these kinds of movies. And yeah, the 90s, I got spoiled rotten in the 90s because I was like the great heyday of the American independent film. Obviously, we've had independent films going back to like the 1930s, but in the 90s, for whatever reason, the money was flowing, the talent was out there, and there was just this rush of talent to making independent films. The same way we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years, a rush of talent to places like YouTube or TikTok or Instagram or whatever the case might be. All those people, if they'd been born 20 years earlier, they would have invested all that energy into making independent movies. So naturally, we ended up getting some good ones. We also got tons of terrible ones as well. I mean, if you look back on just like the sheer glut of content that was being made at that time, not all those movies were made equal. But if you're making, 1,000 independent movies a year, well, then maybe somewhere between 10 and 20 of them are going to end up being movies by people like Hal Hartley or Richard Linklater and those kind of luminaries. So I do miss the independent kind of movie craze of the 1990s, but nothing lasts forever. But I feel like this is a great flashback to what made that period so goddamn cool. And this is all coming from somebody who's not particularly interested in the subject of big feet and Sasquatch and that sort of thing. I know some people where they're like, dude, like not only do I believe they exist, they live in my backyard, I might be related to them. Like I know there's some people that are, woo, like they are all in on the subject, and more power to them. I'm not a fellow devotee or however you pronounce that word, but who knows, maybe this movie will, it'll convert me to their cause, and I'll start watching a hell of a lot more movies about this subject. But if you like visual storytelling, if you like incredibly raw emotional performances that, once again, are all in the eyes and the body movement, I think people are going to be blown away by this, but the audience is going to be teeny tiny. But if I can't use this channel to celebrate really cool independent movies, what's the point of having a YouTube channel about movies in the first place? So with that, I'm going to wrap this up. I hope I've placed this movie on some people's radar. Definitely hunt it down. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, hitting the bell, liking the video, yada, 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 leaving a comment. But I hope everybody has a great week. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.